I think we'd like to start. Good morning. I'm Brian Farrell. I'm the director of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, and I'm thrilled to be part of today's event with you all. It's become clear that we're close to the tipping point for irreversible change to a planet that we share with more than 7 billion people and more than 1 million other species. Every year there's dramatic losses of polar ice, catastrophic increases in the intensity of storms, profound changes in the distributions of species, including those most relevant to humans, disease vectors, pollinators, food plants. At risk is loss of the rainforests which mediate our planet's atmosphere and are home to most of the world's species and of rainforest people with priceless knowledge. Amazonia is the largest rainforest in the world, shared by 8 countries, including Peru and Colombia, and principally Brazil. No single place has a larger impact on the planet as a whole, and yet is more at risk from political and environmental threats. My colleagues Bruno Carvalho and Bruno de Medeiros and I organized this gathering of voices today and tomorrow to try to create here at Harvard a tipping point for response to climate change. Over the next day and a half, we'll hear from scientists, from journalists, from policymakers, from philanthropic organizations, and from someone who embodies the Amazon rainforest and its people. The conversations begun today will continue outside this meeting and afterwards, here and in Brazil, and with the aim of planning and executing a program for change. The time for Brazil and for the Amazon rainforest is now. Now, no one at Harvard, and perhaps no one on the planet, has so well represented our human interdependence with the ecosystems of which we are part as our first speaker, Edward Osborne Wilson. Edward O. Wilson is recognized as one of the creators of 2 scientific disciplines, island biogeography and sociobiology, 3 unifying concepts for science and the humanities jointly, biophilia, biodiversity studies, and consilience, and 1 major technological advance in the study of global biodiversity, the Encyclopedia of Life. Among more than 100 awards he's received worldwide are the U.S. National Medal of Science, the Crawford Prize of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, the International Prize of Biology of Japan, and in letters, 2 Pulitzer Prizes in nonfiction, the Nonino and the Saronno Prizes of Italy, and the Cosmos Prize of Japan. He's currently Honorary Curator in Entomology and University Research Professor Emeritus at Harvard University. And with that, Edward Wilson.
Is this thing working or? Okay, thank you, Farish, and thank you for all you're doing for Harvard in your many activities that are combining science with public policy and with environmental planning as well. The Amazon region, I'm going to be brief. The Amazon region, one of the great centers of Earth's biodiversity, perhaps the greatest center of all in substance, mind, and spirit, is crucial to the future of the planet and to humanity. I used to think that where I was working in the old world rainforest, I was in the world center of biodiversity. And in one rich area of Papua New Guinea, I set out to find the number of species, all of the species, found in 1 cubic kilometer. I say cubic because it was a virgin rainforest not far from Port Moresby being cut down, and I could make use of the tragedy, at least to some extent, of getting into the canopy and finding out which ants were there. And I set the world record of 172 species of ants found in that 1 cubic kilometer. Many years later, 2 of our team at Harvard, we have the collection of ants at Harvard, the biggest and most diverse, so on, and we have the largest number of visitors working in it. So a couple in our team there went to the upper Amazon and collected all the ants they could. They weren't deliberately seeing what they got, but they got a pretty thorough collection in a comparable area. How did it compare with my 172 ant species? from Papua New Guinea, the stronghold of diversity of almost everything in that part of the world. They got 352 is the figure I think it was, twice the number that I had gotten. And I don't think they had the advantage of working with the arboreal ants much anyway. I just thought I'd pass that on to you to give you a little bit of documentation of this thing I've just said and show you that it's not hyperbole. Harvard professors never engage in hyperbole. Okay. At any rate, in the present day global conservation movement, the drive to sustainability has become focused on the non-living part of the environment, on climate change, on resource availability and depletion, and on pollution behind a lot of the changes occurring. And those, of course, are of vital importance. But I'm going to take this brief several minutes I have here to say, first of all, climate change in particular is entering the zone of planetary emergency. We're running the risk of reaching fail-safe, that is, going beyond the point of no return, when global warming becomes autonomous and cannot be stopped. I think that's something that should be understood from the beginning. We don't know exactly what direction we're taking and how far it'll be before we'll become, well, I'm going to coin a term here, venerized. Venerized means become like our sterile sister planet Venus. Few people realize that in 1971, the Russians landed soft landers on Venus. They were the first to do so on another planet. And they landed 2 of them and found that Venus temperature at the surface is, I think, at 1,800 degrees, enough to melt lead, and that the atmosphere of Venus is approximately 100 times that of the Earth. And I had a number of conversations with Carl Sagan, and one of our favorite topics was keeping up with space exploration of this sort, with an eye to the possibility of life on other planets. And I said to him when the Venera 1 and 2 reports came in, I said, well, scratch another planet where we might be looking. And he said, oh, no, Ed, no. There might be life in the atmosphere. It's so thick that it might be a little bit like the sea. And you know, life originated on Earth in the sea. Is it possible that Venus's thick atmosphere would have been comparable to Earth's sea, and we should be looking in that level for life and so on? But I digress. Nevertheless, we don't want to be venerized. That's the important thing. But at the same time, and I want to use just several minutes I have left to emphasize it, the living part of the environment is equally in trouble. Yet, unlike climate change, it is still dangerously neglected. Each of the 3 levels of biodiversity is declining steeply, and we should keep this in mind even when we're focused on climate change, because that's one of the major reasons why we're losing Earth's biodiversity. Let me just mention that for your information, if you hadn't thought a lot about this already, biodiversity exists in a hierarchy of 3 levels. There is the ecosystems, which like ponds and patches of forest and bowls and tree trunks, and the bacterial flora of your hind gut that keeps you healthy. And then there are the species that make up the ecosystems. And finally, there is at the bottom fundamental level, the genes that prescribe the traits that define the species that make up the ecosystems. And each of the three levels is declining steeply. Each of these three levels needs immediate, far more attention than it's getting in world science. I might add parenthetically, to add to the aims and the ambitions of this particular meeting, we should have the possible goal, the reachable goal of Harvard University being the world center of studies on biodiversity. We have this possibility because we have the great associated institutions with some of the largest collections accumulated over 200 years in them. The herbarium and the other plant collections, the Arboretum and the Museum of Comparative Zoology together are true world-class collections sitting there waiting for Harvard to take leadership with others, not just in climate change research and the measures needed to bring it to a halt, but also to save Earth's biodiversity. Each of the three levels of biodiversity is declining steeply. At the species level, which is the pivotal unit of biodiversity, extinction is approaching 1,000 times that prior to the global spread of humanity. Half of the species alive today could be gone by the end of the century unless humanity decides to take action to prevent it. Please add this to your thinking if you have not already done so when you start talking about what will be the impact of global warming if we don't stop it. We're at risk of not only losing most of the heritage that took billions of years to evolve, but also the stability of the planet itself provided by biodiversity, a stability that includes the maintenance of a literally useful level of climate and climate change around the world. Let me suggest an informal but iron law of conservation science as follows. If we save the living natural environment intact, that is to say, save what we have left of it, we'll also save the non-living environment because each depends ultimately on the other. But if we save only the non-living environment, as humanity seems hell-bent on doing, we will lose them both. The rest of life on this planet, what we call the natural world, the living world, nature, Mother Nature, is our home. It gives us birth. It gave us birth. It gives us life. We're part of it. To save the rest of life, the 10 million other species, is achievable. And that is why one of the reasons why the magnificent Amazon region and the great spreads of tropical forest and savanna grassland around it are essential to a global environmental future for Earth, and that action based on scientific knowledge combining with moral commitment is a necessity of our generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for lending us your perspective and direction over the next day. It'll join us for questions after today's session. I'm going to introduce the moderator, Paul Moorcroft, now, and he'll then introduce each of our speakers this morning. Now, Paul is an Earth systems scientist. He investigates the impacts of climate and land use change on ecosystems and how the responses of ecosystems can affect climate. He investigates, in other words, the dialogue between Earth and the thin atmosphere around us. Paul examines these issues in numerous regions around the globe, from equator to the poles, including the Amazon, the United States, and boreal and tundra ecosystems far to the north. Paul took his undergraduate degree at Cambridge University and his PhD in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Princeton University. After spending 3 years as postdoctoral researcher at the Princeton Environmental Institute, Paul joined the Harvard faculty in 2001 in our Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology. And with that, Paul.
Thanks, Brian. So it's my pleasure to introduce the first panel of today, which is a distinguished panel of 4 Brazilian researchers whose work focuses on the science of climate change and land use change and land transformation and the feedbacks that that has onto the climate in Amazonia. As Brian mentioned, I'll introduce the speakers individually, but just the quick overview of the 4 panels, the 4 people on the panel. We're going to begin with Tasso Azevedo, who is a forester and social entrepreneur. Welcome. We'll then followed by Marina Hirota, who's a professor at the University of Santa Catarina, Paulo Artaxo, a professor from USP, and then our own Marcia Castro. So I'm going to now ask Tasso to come up, and I will introduce his research. So Tasso is a consultant and social entrepreneur in the field of forestry, sustainability, and climate change. He's a member of the Climate Observatory, where he coordinates estimates of greenhouse gas emissions and land use change at the scale of individual countries. He is by training a forestry engineer from USP, the University of Sao Paulo, and was founder and director of Imaflora, which is the largest forest stewardship council and sustainable agricultural certifier in Latin America. He was director of the National Forest Program of Brazil at the Ministry of the Environment and General Secretary of Brazil's National Forest Commission. He was also the first Chief Director of the Director General of the Brazilian Forest Service. He serves as a board member of several organizations. He also teaches postgraduate programs on sustainability. He's a columnist in Brazil, in the Brazilian media. And in 2013, he received the Bright Award at Stanford's Global Sustainability Prize and was a climate and forest consultant for the opening ceremony of the Rio 2006 Olympic Games. So without more ado, Tasso.
Hi. Direct to the point. So that's our goal, right? 2 degrees, Paris Agreement, everybody knows it's possible 1.5. That's what I want to be. To do so, according to the IPCC, our budget for 50% chance, I know I don't get to airplanes that have 50% chance to get anywhere, but that's where we're going. 770 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Our emissions today, globally, 52. So it's kind of hard stuff to do, right, on the next couple of years. Okay, this is like I take this from the last report from IPCC on the 1.5 degrees scenarios. And difficult to see here the colors, but if you see that the 0 line is here, on emissions. So most of the scenarios that you have here, it's basically saying that after 2050, somehow we have to get to below 0 in emissions, like to have negative emissions. Means like a lot of reducing on emissions and a lot of increase on sinking carbon and greenhouse gas. So how we do that? Large scale. Not possible if we don't tackle the land use and land use sector and land use change sector. And why? Because that's where we can sink carbon the same way we can decrease the emissions, right? So kind of in a small design here, that's how the whole system is working. On as you see here, like there is more carbon stock in forests than you have carbon in the fossil fuels that we are actually pumping up to the atmosphere. So we are pumping a lot of carbon here on this side, and a little bit in the forest also, like, about 10% or something. But we are capturing a lot of this carbon back on the ocean and in the forest. So the thing here for us is to decrease, obviously, what's going on here, like what's emitting here, and increase how much we are sinking on the other side. So this is like the basic equation for the perspective of who is looking for the land use and land use change. So why is it important for Brazil? So Brazil has the 13% of the forests in the world. It's just smaller than the Russian forest, but there is much more carbon. So there's about 25% of all the carbon that have in forests are in Brazil. But also, we have the highest rate of deforestation by far. So you have this two things. So which makes Brazil the 7th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. We always compete with Indonesia. Depends on how much fire you have in Indonesia. They get more emissions than us. But it's kind of, it's there. But we are also one of the top 3 sinkers of carbon. So the decisions we take in Brazil and the way we manage our land really matters for this whole debate, right? So by far, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil comes from the land use and land use and forest and deforestation and so on. So even after we have like this steep decline on deforestation between like 2004 2011, we still have 70% of our emissions come from this sector. Like from the top emitters is the only country that has like this pattern. Normally is the opposite. Like you have energy as the main source of emissions. So it's emitting because of the cattle. It's emitting because of the deforestation, any change. Change on the land use and so on. So we are very good in Brazil. For many years we have been doing that of measuring loss of forest. So it's kind of you have a forest and you don't have a forest anymore, and we have been monitoring that since '88. Actually, in fact, the first measure was done by INPE in 78, 79. Was one of the first use of Landsat imagery, was actually monitor the deforestation in the Amazon. So, but we lack information of what's happened afterwards. So the idea of the research that I have been working with several organizations in Brazil is to kind of understand what is this dynamics. We want to understand how the things are actually changing from one side to the other, so we could interfere to get better decisions on stimulating the positive change, like for example, going from cattle to some agroforestry or regenerative agriculture, or going back to reforestation and going back to forest, and avoid the negative transitions would be like from natural environments for example, mining and low and pasture, for example. So what we want to do basically is to shift from this dynamics, which is basically go from forest, non-forest to forest, and understand like the whole dynamics of what's going on kind of in multiple directions in multiple times. To do so, we said, well, easy. We just have to have a map of the land use of every year in Brazil, and then we compare those maps, and that's it. We're done. Then I find out that it's a little bit more complicated than that to do it. But not knowing that it was complicated, we decide to do it. So we put up together. I think there is a lot of light, so it's difficult to see some of the stuff there. But okay. So we put together a very diverse group of institutions. So you have like universities, you have like NGOs, startup companies, funded by different organizations that come together. It's an initiative. It's not like there is no institution that is responsible for everything. It's basically everybody working together to kind of create the methodology and the way to do this very fast. We want to have maps, like the usual maps for land use. Detailed land use in Brazil took like 1.5 years, like roughly 2 years to do it. 9 people, $3 million, very slow. And so we want to say, okay, if you want to do all the 33 years, like 3 decades, very fast, what do you have to do? So we basically moving to this dynamics where we use like all the Landsat collection that has been available for free since 2008, processing everything pixel by pixel, so there's no mapping like the designing what is each area. We took the 9.5 billion pixels that makes Brazil on 30 by 30 meters, and just like, how can we actually tell the computer how to classify this with the land use, right? So it's all machine learning, a lot of training the computer and so on, and it's all cloud-based processing. That's very important. It's all done on Google Earth Engine, which allows for people in the the best laboratories to work in the same conditions as the people in the very poor laboratories. So it's kind of allows to everybody to contribute to the project. So we're trying to kind of see the land use for various categories. So like types of forest, known forest vegetation, farming, pasture, separate pasture from agriculture, and urban areas and etc. So it's kind of several classes. So at the end, what you have is there a way to kind of decrease a little bit the light? So otherwise we'll not see any of the maps. Huh? Yeah, it's a kind of but it looks strange. I don't even recognize that. Okay, well, we go from it. So, so the idea at the end is like you have like a map. This is an open platform where you can navigate over the time, and you can go all the way to the pixel level. So you can, in any one of those maps, you can go all the way to the 30-meter pixel. And for everything that you've seen here, you can see the statistics of area in any one of those places. So, for example, if we go to the Xingu area here, it's really strange because some colors are not there, so I kind of interpreted this. So if you could see like the yellow part and the pink part, this would be like pink. This is agriculture. This yellow stuff here is pasture. Obvious green is the dense forest. Then you have this open forest, some grasslands, water. So that's 85 in the Xingu area. And then you go to 2000, very sad, but a lot of pasture coming close here. Agriculture is starting to grow here in Mato Grosso. And then finally you get like 2017, it's everything soybean, cotton, etc. around there. So the idea here is like to understand, you can see really the change, but not just really the same, but change for what? What is the dynamics that's happening, right? And the idea is that you can do this in various scales. So you can do this for the whole country, for each biome. You can do for each one of the 84 watersheds. You can do for each one of the 5,500 municipalities, each protected area. Any cut that you want to understand the dynamics. So this is like an interesting case. This is like Sinop. It's a kind of municipality that represents the dynamics of the region. This is 85, and this is 2017. So it's basically transformed into a field for soybean. So the other thing that we put on this platform is a way to actually compare any pair of years. So then you can kind of start to think about the dynamics, how things are moving. So this is, for example, comparing 85 with 2017. So you could compare any pair of like 2011 with 2014, whatever you are interested in. So here is basically representing in red. You saw this a lot, this kind of maps. Like red is everything you lose in natural stuff, and green is what you gain. Actually, there are some green here. No, it's not too bad. Like, you still have, you have some good things. Yeah. So, but then you can. That's strange. Okay. So then you can have this type of sunken graphics where you can understand from what to what. So this is like, if you could see here the thing here, it's like this energy dynamics. So you see, like this is like what was forest that now is agriculture. How much of the forest now is pasture? Imagine that there is a line here, and you can see that. So you can choose any one of those, and then you can see on the map just this transition. So the idea is that you can understand geographically where are those transitions. Where are the places in Brazil that were forests in, let's say, 2002, that in 2017 were urban areas. So you can get this for anywhere in the country in the 30-meter resolution. So then you can add all the properties, for example. This is like, so you can know in which property this thing's happening, and etc. You can see with the image, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Then it starts to think about how you can use this data to kind of understand processes. So this is one example. This is a road, the road map in Rondônia State. I just took Rondônia State after the conversation in the dinner yesterday. So in Rondônia, that is like in 85, that's this is like all federal roads. And that is like 2017. So then you start to think about like what is the impact of the infrastructure, for example, in terms of the land use change. So so this platform has all the infrastructure of energy, everything related to energy and transportation in Brazil, railroads from airports, ports, blah blah, everything on transmission lines, power plants, and so on. So you can, for all of them, you can choose a buffer and understand what is going on in this buffer in the land use change during this period, right? So this is a good example, like the buffer area of 20 kilometers along these roads lost 44% of the forest in just 30 years, like very fast, right? So it's like just the Brazil changing over the past 30 years. And what is interesting is that if you see like before and after, like in the maps, some things call the attention, right? A vast increase on the deforestation in the Amazon, like at the top here, right? A lot of growth of agriculture to the center of the country, especially in the Cerrados and in São Paulo, for example. So this brings it to this point, for example. About 68% of the country is still forest cover, or natural vegetation cover, right? So it's a high number. You look at this and say, wow, this is like, you still have 68%. Why are you complaining, right? But actually, only 50% of the country has been natural vegetation since the 85. Means like 18% of what we have as natural vegetation in Brazil is actually secondary forest that somehow was not forest and then it's back in like a forest or regeneration, natural regeneration, right? So this is like another interesting cut. It's like everything you see on the left side is areas that haven't changed in the last 30 years. And everything you see on the right is areas that actually change, and change for what on this period. So Brazil changed, so if you take all the pixels of Brazil, between 30 and 40%, depending on the criteria, change over the last 30 years. Just for a comparison, if you take the whole Europe, it's 3%. So that's dynamics of changing that happen very fast on the region, right? This is like the trends of what's going on in Brazil. Like, so you see water surface is growing. I will come to this point very quickly because I have just 1 minute. Non-vegetated areas, that's farming is growing, and then it's decreasing like the known forest formations and forests, which it looks obvious for the maps. So this is like just looking into the Amazon, right? You see like the deforestation is going from south to north, going to the center of the forest, right? So you can, using this data, we can actually plot all the deforestation that happened year by year on the last 33 years. And what is interesting is to compare this map with this. Well, actually, this is interesting. If you look at what was forest, that now is other land use in Brazil. In the Amazon, 90% will be pasture, and 10% will be agriculture. Less than 1% is cities and other use. Now, if you put this one, I can look at this and this. This is like another project that we did with like water, right? So in the dark blue is natural water streams, and the light blue is like water reservoirs, artificial, that was made by people, right? So before these maps, we believe that we had about like 10,000 of those artificial water reservoirs in whole Brazil. That was what we have in the National Water Agency. So in this map, just for the Amazon, there is 40,000 that was mapped. So it's increasing. So what happened is that as deforestation is growing, the water availability is going down. And so you start to create your own reservoirs to have water for your agriculture and pasture and so on. And every time you have a little bit more drought, you increase the number of those plots. So what's happening is that the water surface of the region it's actually increasing a little bit, but what is growing is actually the amount of water reservoir. The amount of surface of natural streams is decreasing, and decreasing fast, which has a lot of impacts on the biology and ecology of the region. Now I have to finish. So just another interesting topic, which I think is related to what will be the solutions that we will see in the end. What happened, this is a study done by Embrapa and INPE, which they analyze what happened between 88 and 2014 with all the areas that were clear-cut during this period. And they find out that 63% of those areas that were clear-cut now are low productivity pasture. And 23% was abandoned and is in regeneration. So it's basically why we actually clear-cut forests, right? Because you clear-cut forest to what? To have this type of productivity makes no sense, right? So it's really, not very efficient for the country. So to end here, I think to move for the reverse of this trend and conserve the forest and water, we have to do these lessons, right? Make deforestation negligible. There is many ways in which we can work on this. Implement the forest code. Stop illegal occupation of public lands. There is still a lot of public land in Brazil that's being illegally occupied, grabbing, and so on. Optimize the use of agricultural land. Come on, we can't have this low productivity areas like we have there. Restore critical areas and promote the economy of the forest and biodiversity. So we are moving now this whole concept of this project for other regions. We just launched with partners in all the other Amazon countries the first collection for the whole Amazon. So it was launched 1 month ago. We also work in Chaco region between Argentina and Paraguay. First collection will be launched next week. And next we'll go into Indonesia, so it's just came back from there. We hope to start this work with them on local organizations also doing that to have as a kind of a global movement of thinking on tropical forests and this dynamics and so on. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasso. So our next speaker is Professor Marina Hirota, who's a professor of meteorology at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil. Marina has an interdisciplinary background. Her first degree was a bachelor's in applied mathematics, followed by a master's in computer engineering, a PhD in meteorology, and then postdoctoral work in the area of theoretical ecology. Marina applies this diverse training that she's received as an Earth system scientist, and her work in particular focuses on the processes and interactions involved in biome shifts within the tropical biomes of the planet, so how the boundaries between the ecosystems move in relation to climate, using concepts from dynamical systems theory, such as resilience, tipping points, and hysteresis. In particular, she has searched for multi-scale and synergistic mechanisms within the atmosphere and the biosphere to deepen our quantitative and qualitative understanding of the basis of resilience in South American tropical ecosystems. So, Marina.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks the organizers for putting up such a nice meeting and for inviting me to be here. Thanks, Paul, for the introduction. So what I'm going to talk to you today here is a bit different from what Tasso just did. It's about tipping points and resilience within the Amazon forest, and considering mainly natural extremes, natural per se, but natural extreme rather than land use change. Okay? So what I'm guiding you through today is the motivation to study the Amazon forest in the first place as a tipping element of the Earth system, the tipping points within the Amazon, and what has been said by researchers about this, and how tipping points flipped to resilience in the past, 5 years, and how to move forward in this framework of tipping points and resilience, because it's very abstract in the first sight. So the motivation is first that the Amazon rainforest has been listed as one of the tipping elements of the Earth system back in 2008. And this includes a temperature increase in 3 or 4 degrees, a critical value, a threshold of 1,100 millimeters a year for the forest to sustain itself, and a gradual transition in, well, gradual, 50 years is quite fast for this system. And the implications is related to this transition would be biodiversity loss and decreased rainfall. And more recently, you cannot see the map behind it, but the Amazon forest is here, and all the tipping elements from here are plotted back in the map, and they are all linked to each other, except for coral reefs and Indian summer monsoon and the Sahel, but some of them are not linked yet. But some studies show that all these links may shift the Earth towards a hot Earth, so to say. So not only tipping elements, but they are all linked. And they can, well, the result could be a very strong change in a few years. So in the Amazon itself, droughts have been more intense and more frequent in the past few years. So people do suffer there because mainly they transport and need from water. And if you have a drought, it's a problem, as you can see here, in 2005 and 2010. And then scientifically saying, it has been shown that these droughts affect, affected much more larger area comparing 2005 and 2010. And in the El Nino of 15-16, this area increased even more, but more to the east, northeastern here. So the question would be how vegetation will respond to these changes, because with climate change, it's likely that the frequency and intensity of droughts increase, right? Are there tipping points in terms of the basing? Is the basing changing like in a flip, like 50 years is quite fast for this kind of change? And is there a tipping point? Can we measure it? So this is the motivation for my PhD and so on, and the other things I did. Then just to put everybody on the same page, because I don't know if you had this background, for tipping points, we can say, or we can compare these 3 panels. So first, you have the ecosystem response. So in our case, vegetation response. And here below, in the x-axis, you have conditions. Let's say precipitation, dry season precipitation, mean precipitation, soil conditions, whatever you want. And then the response of vegetation could be linear, could be gradual, but still you have like a threshold here, right? Gradual, but with a threshold. And you could have something abrupt. Let's say you you increase conditions in this case, and then you come to a point called a bifurcation point or a tipping point, and then you change suddenly here. You don't have this path. This is very unstable. So here you have stable, stable, and very unstable. So you can flip to here in a flip, right? And then we're going to talk about this, right? So change in conditions. Let's say climate change, you decrease or you increase a condition here, you can flip. And you can also have another possibility, and this would be related to human activities. So you have a perturbation in the system that could flip the system before it reaches a tipping point. Let's say a fire, a deforestation, or something changes in the state, not in conditions, right? So I'm going to talk about more about this, but this is also, I think, in the context of this whole discussion. And another question would be, okay, if it tips, what would it tip to? Because in terms of natural disturbances, it could tip to, to a savanna-like state, and this has been broadly published, and I did it myself. So it would look like something like this, or would it still be a forest? And this is Cachiuanan in Belém in 2015, in an experiment that has been cut off precipitation in 50% for the last 20 years, and it's still a forest. But, as Ed mentioned, I thought it was very interesting because the composition and the functionality of this forest is totally different, and this has been measured. So would it still be a forest? And if it is a forest, what are the damages? What is the loss? Or it could also, recently being said by Dexter and collaborators, still be a dry seasonal forest. It would still be a forest, but different, right? So mostly, this is going to depend on the feedbacks involved in the tipping or in the system, the structure, composition, and functionality, not only structure, let's say canopy cover, and the spatial scale you're talking about, because when you increase in heterogeneity, it's likely that you're smoothing out the signal of a tipping point. So let's explore a bit these things here, okay? So the first feedback I want to present you is related to shifts in structure. So canopy cover, tree cover percentage, not composition and functionality. So let's say I have forest. I don't have as beautiful graphs as Tasso, I guess, but this is my forest, and this is, let's say, a savanna. What we have so far is that above 2,500 millimeters a year, canopy formation or canopy closure prevents fire to occur here, and then forests will thrive and will be a stable state. If I get below this, this would be a threshold, and below this up to 650, depends where you are, if in Africa or in Brazil, but 650 millimeters a year of annual precipitation, then you would have a savanna, a stable savanna. In between this, fire regime is mostly controlling these feedbacks because it interacts with the fuel in the savannas, and fire is not prevented anymore by the canopy closure and the humidity below the canopy closure. So this grass-fire feedback would favor savanna-like state if you have a dry season intensification, for example, or if you decrease the amount of annual precipitation per year. Okay, so related to these fire thresholds, then you have the scale, the spatial scale issue, because then you can look at individual level and bark thickness, which is a functional trait. So the more, or the thicker the bark, the more insulated is the tree. So this will prevent trees to die from a fire event or from a dry season, intensification in the dry season. And you have a fire suppression threshold at the community level with canopy closure, right? So we have different scales here, but in terms of the precipitation envelope, it would be 700 millimeters to 2,500 millimeters. In between this, you could flip. So areas that are within this range here, this interval, could flip depending on the fire regime. If you include soil as an interactive condition here, then soil fertility would play a role in sustaining or not forest, right? So what this means is that this condition is not in the scale of the precipitation regime. That's why we consider this an interactive condition. But still you have a feedback here. And depending on this feedback, you could still sustain a forest or you could move to a savanna-like state. So but what about the other conditions, right? How do we compute tipping points for all possible conditions depending on which scale, which one works? And this is pretty hard. So this is where it flipped to resilience, in my opinion. because resilience is a very broad thing, and then you can say other things rather than tipping points. And it's kind of easier to work with this. So the idea is that you have the same graph I presented to you with bifurcation points, and then you construct stability landscapes with this ball in a cup illustration. And then you have resilience as whatever you want to define resilience based on this ball in a cup illustration. So can be quite broad, and it's very hard to define. But still, if you consider two types of resilience, engineering resilience and ecological resilience, one could be related to the capacity to recover. So only how the ball or the system would bounce forward and back here. And the capacity to persist. So independent on the cycle you have, you could have a cycle. So we could, the forest or an ecosystem could die and then come back and then die and then come back. And this would imply alternative states, the graph I showed you, and would measure the capacity to persist, not only to recover. Okay? So how do we quantify resilience in the Amazon? Right? So the first attempt was done by structural components, not only, yeah, we should work with also with composition and functionality, but in terms of the structure, for example, here, resilience has been measured as the probability of being a forest, right? So in here, the greener, the more stable would be the system. It's a very simple measure. And in this here, we can see that in the arc of deforestation, we are very close to tip, let's say. And if you consider stochastically fire, in this work here, you can also see that we are close to a bifurcation point. So we would be bistable, right? Okay. So not only mean annual precipitation, as shown here, is affecting the Amazon resilience, but also it's not very clear, but climate variability is also likely to change resilience of the forest. So in here, we have a very recent study that show this variability here as a compensation mechanism. For example, here for areas of very high variability, it seems that resilience increases even with very low values of variability. Oh, sorry, mean annual precipitation. So in low variability areas, you wouldn't have a forest here, very unlikely, but you do have a forest if this forest is embedded in high variability landscapes or areas, right? And this variability and this compensation mechanism is mainly due to interannual variability, the one related to El Nino events, for example. So not extreme events, but variable in the year, not like in the mean, right? It's very variable along the mean. So it means that plants seem to learn more from variable climates, right? The more variable is the climate, the more they adapt and they select for species that are adapted to more variable conditions. So in terms of deforestation, just quickly, because Tim is warning me about the time, it has been shown that a cascading effect on the moisture recycling in the Amazon, and here again, the same graphs I showed you. So splitting the Amazon in different regions, we see here the current condition in precipitation, right? Mean annual precipitation here. If deforestation is as it is now, in the pace it is now, without forest cover in some areas here, we could decrease resilience of the Amazon by shifting this precipitation value to here. So in areas like the southeastern Amazon, northwestern Amazon, and Guiana Shield, we could have a flip. But localized, not widespread, right? And then deforestation increases would imply in evapotranspiration decreases in a cascading effect on moisture flow downstream. So deforestation here would imply decrease in resilience downstream, the flow in the wind. Okay, so my last thing is structure versus composition and functionality, and it has been shown that this heterogeneity here in the Amazon forest, in here we have tree cover, and this heterogeneity in tree cover could be strike to change the nature of this tipping point. Okay, so in here in Africa, we see the hysteresis or alternative states possibility is likely to happen in very small scales, whereas if you get the continental scale, this signal disappears. So abrupt shifts are likely to occur locally, but not continentally because of heterogeneity. And then here, just to show how heterogeneity changes the response of vegetation. So you have abrupt response here in pinkish, and you have, if you have a model with individual plant dynamics, you have a different response. It's more smooth in here, right? So heterogeneity seems to play a role and can be decisive to see these flips. And lastly, functional composition here has been shown to select for more dry affiliated species. So its composition is changing in these parts of the Amazon here. And the net effect of this change in composition is slower than the climate change pace. So climate changing is going faster than the shift in vegetation. Okay, so we're changing to a different forest in this case, okay, in the Amazon forest. So where we are, we see that large-scale precipitation changes and deforestation may change vegetation structure and point towards catastrophic shifts to a savanna-like state, meaning a low tree cover state, but locally, not continentally. And how to move forward, I believe heterogeneity has to be accounted for, and different spatial scales and interaction between and among these spatial scales have to be included in this analysis, in this framework, and it's quite hard, but we are trying to do it. And then how do we include humans as part of the system in terms of the internal dynamics I'm presenting here and all these feedback loops, not only as an agent, external agent that's destroying everything. So thank you very much. I'm sorry for the time, Tim. And I want to thank the funding agencies and all the people involved in all these projects. Thank you very much.
So next speaker is Professor Paulo Tasso, who is a professor of environmental physics at the University of Sao Paulo. Paulo got his undergraduate degree at USP and his PhD. His undergraduate was in physics. His PhD was in environmental physics. He then did postdocs in Europe and then a spell at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland before he became a professor at USP. Paulo's research is focused heavily on the Amazon. He's worked for over 30 years in the Amazon, in particular unveiling the workings of this complex ecosystem. And in particular, his research focuses on atmospheric chemistry and the role that aerosols have on the climate of the region and how that in turn affects its radiation balance, the interactions between clouds and aerosols above the Amazon, and the effects that those have on the ecosystems of the Amazon. He's also been a major scientific leader in a number of areas. He helped coordinated the LBA program, which was a joint initiative between NASA and Brazil to better understand the Amazon. He was General Secretary of the Commission of Atmospheric Chemistry and Global Pollution. He is a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, and he's also a fellow of the American Academy of Sciences. He received an honorary doctorate from the University of Stockholm, and also received a National Science Order of Merit from Brazil. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the organizers to put together this very nice and relevant agenda, especially on these difficult times for Brazil. So basically what I'm going to start exploring is basically, I think it's important to emphasize that Amazonia is a critical environment for the global planet, for the global climate, for the global biodiversity, and for the global hydrological cycle that I expect will become clear after the whole set of the presentation. And Amazonia is a key component of the Earth system, and we still are learning a lot on how the functioning of the Amazonian ecosystem actually works in terms of climate impacts. One curious and very peculiar thing of Amazonia is that the biology of the forest itself, through the biogenic VOC emissions and also emissions of trace gases, aerosols, water vapor, and so on, controls the atmospheric chemistry and controls the physics of climate. So there is no other place in the world where the links between the biological functioning of the forest is so important in terms of atmospheric chemistry and also radiative forcing and cloud formation mechanisms and many, many critical things of the physical climate. So we are still learning how this very complex system works. So basically it's important to note that the forest is the source of the processing of the water vapor into the atmosphere, and the emissions from the plants themselves are the source of the cloud condensation nuclei. That makes one of the more strong hydrological cycles in the world, and then that is responsible for a lot of precipitation that feedbacks into the system. So these feedbacks are extremely important in the natural ecosystem, and we are still learning how the transition from the natural ecosystem to a system dominated by farming and biomass burning emissions actually works, and which are the implications for climate and so on. So a few years ago, we wrote a review mentioning that Amazonia cannot be seen anymore as just a pure forest, untouched forest, with the forest at about 20% of the original area, but it's always important to remember that 80% is exactly like it was, let's say, 500 years ago when Brazil was discovered. And basically the agricultural expansion, logging, and also global climate change is putting a lot of pressures on the ecosystem, changing several different processes and making a lot of different changes in the ecosystem dynamics. So to understand how this system works is really a challenge and is extremely important to define proper ways of dealing with the Amazonia. So basically, agricultural expansion, the reality of the agricultural expansion is actually changing dramatically the ecosystem, and also the fight and forest degradation is critical issues like the previous speakers emphasized. So basically, we're going to discuss some of the issues associated with the changes in the hydrological cycle that I think are extremely important for Amazonia. So Amazonia is characterized by natural clouds that are very, very different from clouds produced through aerosol particles emitted by biomass burning. So we have a very efficient precipitation system in the natural system and quite non-efficient system when the clouds are produced by biomass burning, as we're going to show that later. And Amazonia is critical in terms of processing of water vapor, Water vapor is not generated in Amazonia, of course, it's generated in the tropical Atlantic that is being heated up by 2 or 3 degrees already, and then this is processed into Amazonia, and it feeds water vapor to the main agricultural regions of Brazil. So an important question is, if you deforest a significant component of Amazonia here, what will happen with the hydrological cycle downwind of Amazonia is an important issue. And also try to understand what kind of process control these fluxes from water vapor from the tropical Atlantic Ocean to the forest to the important agricultural regions in Amazonia. And the question if the Amazonian hydrological cycle is changing is an open question. There are several evidence that is possibly the answer could be yes. So this is a paper from Emmanuel Glor that shows the Amazon River discharge at Óbidos, close to the mouth of Amazonia, is increasing in the last 20 years in the wet season and also in the dry season. It's lower in the dry season, but much stronger in the wet season, and this is the average increase. This increase in the hydrological cycle could, or not, be associated with the tropical Atlantic sea surface temperature. That's also, of course, very well documented that is increasing very fast and significantly. So we are already observing critical changes in the Amazonian hydrological cycle. The second changes we are observing is the increase in the extremes in the hydrological cycle. So this is a paper from people from INPA that shows that the droughts are being intensified and also the sharp increase in the flood rate, especially over the last 20, 30 years. So actually, not just the average hydrological cycle is increasing, but also the extreme events are increasing significantly. Another well-documented change in Amazonia, this is a paper from Hongfu that shows the dry season length is increasing in Amazonia. So this is when the rain starts during the dry season, and we see that this is starting later, very significant, and this paper estimates that the dry season length have increased by basically 1 week per decade. And what this means, first, we can have more fires because of that, and second, this has an impact on the biodiversity because the tolerance for the length of the dry season is very different species by species in Amazonia. And this is pretty already well documented. Another way of looking at this is through the studies of Marengo that clearly here from 1951 to 2017 that also shows an increase of 2 to 3 weeks in the length of the dry season. And he observed mostly through the late arrival of the wet season in September, October, as we can see here. So basically, these are well-documented changes in the hydrological cycle. This can be due to many different reasons, not just by climate change. The attribution issue is difficult in Amazonia because it's so complex that it's, of course, very difficult to apportion one single reason for this change that we are observing. But one of the important critical things in Amazonia is the very close link between carbon balance and the hydrological cycle. So basically, radiation drives the energy of the system, and this affects quite a lot in terms of the carbon balance and also the evapotranspiration that drives the hydrological cycle. And this is true for small scale, and also this can be true for large scale, as is actually well documented already. And how is the status now of the carbon balance in Amazonia? Several papers have dealt with that. This is one of the most relevant papers. What we observed that 10, 15 years ago, Amazonia was absorbing about 0.5 tons of carbon per hectare per year. So that is here the net carbon flux from Amazonia. But if you look today, the carbon flux is virtually zero in terms of balance. Why? Mostly because significant increase in tree mortality. And why this is happening? One of the possible explanations is that the drought of 2005 and 2010 brought additional stress to the plant community that increased the mortality, and then the carbon balance right now, instead of absorbing carbon at a significant rate, 0.5 tons per hectare per year, now is basically carbon neutral. And then this is documented also in papers looking into the above ground biomass and drought sensitivity for 2005. If you look here, the above ground biomass change pre-2005 was an issue that was absorbing carbon for most of the sites, but and then during 2005, basically this absorption of carbon have reversed and now have decreased the amount of carbon being absorbed. And the difference is that drought makes a huge effect on the carbon balance. In 2010, this recent paper also showed basically the same thing. So basically, we see that the mortality have increased very significant during the drought of 2010. So you see that the links between carbon and hydrology in Amazonia is very, very important. Amazonia is also, like everywhere in the planet, is changing in terms of climate. So this is estimates of the increase in temperature. So several regions in Amazonia already have increased in terms of temperature about 2 degrees. That's a pretty significant change. And also, we are observing changes in the hydrological cycle. And the question is, what the future for Amazonia is in terms of climate? Of course, that depends on how the projections will go. For instance, Marengo have done with the RCP 8.5 projections that shows that the southern part of Amazonia could have an increase of 6 to 7 degrees that could have a tremendous impact on the functioning of the forest. And also the climate models predict a reduction, especially in the eastern part of Amazonia, in precipitation, and an increase in precipitation in the southern part of Brazil. So if this becomes reality, of course, we'll have serious issue with the release of this carbon to the Amazon. Another important point is that instead of the gradual increase in temperature, the temperature variability is also important. So a recent analysis shows that Amazonia and most of the tropical regions will suffer the highest increase in terms of standard deviation of temperature variability. And the species are very sensitive to huge temperature variability, and this, of course, again, can affect biodiversity in Amazonia. Brazil have a big success story in reducing deforestation. This is the deforestation area for the last 30, 40 years in Amazonia. But now, if you look into the last years, this is 2018, for instance, we are deforesting about 6,000 square kilometers per year. That's a huge amount of area being deforested. And it's increasing, and we certainly can expect that 2019 numbers will be higher than last year. So basically, we are seeing big changes in Amazonia. If you look into the fire spots, another INPE product that is driven completely independent from the deforestation, you see that the fire spots in 2019 were very close to the number of fire spots in 2002 and 2003. So actually, in terms of smoke, in terms of fire spots, we are getting back 20 years ago in terms of impacts in the ecosystem. And this makes a huge cloud of smoke overall in Latin America, and this smoke affects precipitation in the La Plata Basin. So this is a study that shows that smoke in Alta Floresta, smoke in Ji-Paraná, in Rondônia, affected dramatically the amount of water downwind of Manaus because of changes in cloud properties. Another important impact of this smoke is impact of the smoke on the carbon cycling, because having more smoke, you have more diffuse radiation, and we are observing an increase in carbon uptake during the dry season because of the increase in diffuse radiation. This is a modeling study that we have done. This is a modeling study that we have done that according to the biomass burning emissions, you can have a huge increase in the NPP because of the increase in diffuse radiation. Just to finish, a few examples that also Amazonia is suffering important changes in the urbanization. So this is shows the interactions between the urban plume of Manaus with the natural emissions of the forest that shows that the VOC flux changes dramatically if you go from pristine areas to areas influenced by anthropogenic emissions, especially NOx emissions. In an issue that will get more urbanized Amazonia, this component will change, producing more aerosols, impacting the radiation balance and the hydrological cycle. And then it's important to remember to everybody, I think we should discuss this here, that Brazil has an obligation in the Paris Agreement to restoration of 12.5 million hectares by 2025. That is just, let's say, 7 years from now, 6 years from now. So it's a huge task, and the science to do that is not ready yet. How to do that properly, which species, how is the most efficient way to do that is a challenge for the scientific community. And also, last week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity released a very important report calculating the ecosystem services in the Americas that shows that in the Latin America, we have $14 trillion in terms of ecosystem services driven by especially the Amazonian forest. So it's a huge input of capital to the economy, especially to the agribusiness, that of course can change dramatically and quickly if you don't really actually fast. And then just to finish, this is the obligation. IPCC in the 1.5 report shows that we have to reduce CO2 emissions by 3% a year starting next year, zeroing the emissions by 2040, and after that having negative emissions. There is only one way to remove CO2 from the atmosphere that nature does it very efficient. It's called the photosynthesis. So, but how to do that? How to remove 3 or 5 gigatons of carbon per year from the atmosphere? Nobody knows how to do that. Nobody has the technology to do that, and science has a huge task over the next years on how to remove this CO2 from the atmosphere. So, and then my last reminder is that Amazonia is, of course, key to global sustainability, but it's important to note that we have to quickly and strongly reduce fossil fuel emissions. If you change 10% of the total budget in CO2 emissions, forget about the 92%, we will not get anywhere. So basically, we really have to reduce fossil fuel emissions in addition to preserve Amazonia for different regions, and that's a task that science and all the society have to do quickly. Thank you very much for the attention.
Okay, so for our final talk of this session, we have our very own Marcia Castro, who is the Andelot Professor of Demography and Chair of the Department of Global Health at the Harvard School of Public Health. Marcia received her bachelor's degree from Rio de Janeiro State University, her master's from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and then she did a doctorate training at Princeton University, as well as being chair of the Department of Global Health. She's an associate of the Harvard Center for the Environment and a member of the Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies. And just last year, Professor Castro received the Harvard Roger L. Nichols Award for Excellence in her teaching. Marcia's research focuses on multidisciplinary approaches and uses of multiple sources of data to identify the determinants of malaria transmission in different ecological settings and to provide evidence for the improvement of existing malaria control policies and the development of new control policies. She has more than 20 years of research experience in the Brazilian Amazon and, among other things, working to assess the role of extreme events, which we just heard about, extreme weather events, on malaria transmission. She also has projects on other diseases, including dengue, Zika, Chikungunya, tuberculosis, and child and infant mortality. So, without more ado,
Thank
Marcia.
you. All right, so first of all, I want to thank Brian, Bruno, and Bruno for organizing the event, but for giving room for discussing health. So I'm kind of an outlier here, but I want to prove a point that health is important for this discussion. So I'm going to start that discussion by what I believe is some of the roots of the problems that we see now, which is the sort of development model that has been used in the Amazon. And to start that, I go back to the images are not very nice, but this is one of the many maps that were the basis for the whole geopolitics strategy of the military government in the name of national integration. So the whole idea is to integrate the Amazon to the rest of the territory, but hidden under this national integration were military purposes, national security, and the exploitation of natural resources in the Amazon. So the common issues when you think about whatever they call development in the Amazon are some of those. Are basically booms and busts of exploitation of natural resources. Probably one of the first one was rubber way back in history. But you can see the opening of roads, and right here you can see some of the major roads that cut through the forest. And one of the results of that is here you see the arch of deforestation. And the interesting thing about this map, it's not super pretty, but it was put together by the World Bank, which was one of the agencies that financed a lot of the so-called development projects in the region. What is also interesting is that the red dots are the areas where we had massive outbreaks of malaria in the Amazon, and there's a clear overlap with the arch of deforestation, and I'll go back to this issue in a minute. Now, these are the common things. The things that are missing in this model of development is an integration with environmental conservation, addressing local needs, thinking about improving livelihoods and the health of the population, and above all, listening to what they believe are what they need in terms of development. So this is not in anywhere if you read the literature on the model of development for the Amazon. What does health have to do with that? Again, this is just a quick sample of the different things that we have to think about. First and foremost, the infectious diseases, malaria and dengue, the arboviruses, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. But we also have all kinds of health conditions associated to the exposure of wildfire smoke. And I'm glad that Paulo just mentioned the issue of the length of the dry season. This has a direct impact in here. And respiratory infections and asthma, particularly among children, are well documented in the Amazon. Pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases as well, and low birth weight. The other thing is nutritional issues. So if you think about communities that live along rivers that have been dammed, it's quite common that you see a change in the dietary patterns, particularly because of reduced fishery. Again, this is well documented. And needless to say, the indigenous health suffers in many different dimensions, either because their land is being invaded by mining or other purposes, again, to exploit resources, and you can have contamination of water, food, and so on, but also through the direct contact with people that come and they are infected, carrying whatever pathogens they're carrying, that then can disseminate among the indigenous tribe. So what we can see here is that there is a huge impact in human capital, both in children, because if you think about malaria, respiratory infections, and low birth weight, this impacts child development. And you have basically the people that are in the age of labor force that are also getting sick. So you have a dramatic impact in the human capital that kind of perpetuates the cycle of poverty that becomes really hard to get away from. All right, so this is one of the jewels that I found after many expeditions to the National Archives and the National Library in Rio de Janeiro. And this is, to my knowledge, the oldest map showing malaria in Brazil. And as you can see, Acre wasn't part of Brazil yet. And although Acre does exist. Anyway, so what you can see is here, all the red areas are the areas where malaria was high. And you can see it's in the Amazon and along the rivers. And this map was, this is from 1885, and it was actually corroborated by expeditions that were made by Osvaldo Cruz and Carlos Chagas to the Amazon that started in 1910. And by examining how kids had enlarged spleens, they could actually see that there was a lot of malaria. It was really endemic in those areas. Now, if we talk about the more recent time with regards of malaria, if we look at a series, what we can see is that by 1970, Brazil had about 52,000 cases of malaria, and 60% of them were in the Amazon. But these numbers multiplied by 10 in only 15 years. And it's exactly during this time period when sort of the Amazon frontier is being opened by all the large enterprises, by the settlement programs. You have a massive influx of migrants going to the area, completely naive to malaria. You have the environmental change happening. So there is a direct link between deforestation and increasing malaria transmission. And although if we look in here, so the areas in Brazil where malaria was transmitted by the 60s was pretty much all the country except the semi-arid and the southern portion of the country. So the map of malaria did shrink, and basically malaria is now concentrated all in the Amazon region, and there's some malaria here in the whatever is left of the Atlantic forest, but very residual number of cases. Now, what is also interesting is that by 2015, Brazil reached the lowest level of malaria in 36 years. So things were going really well. And then 17, major increase, more than 50%, 18 as well. Just now this week, there seems to be some decline happening. And from what you saw from the previous presentations, that's exactly the moment when deforestation is going up as well. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but it's really a contributing one. And here is, again, I'm sorry, those images look funny, but the whole literature linking malaria, deforestation to malaria, I think until a few years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I think it was pretty well established. And then we had a few publications that questioned that. And sometimes not so good science gets published and it creates a turmoil in the field. That's pretty much what happened. But this paper came out last year, and it used data from Amazon. So Tasso, you're going to be happy about this. And they basically show that there is a direct effect. This graph, not sure you can see, but what they did is they took a moving average of the deforestation, and this is considering all the months, and the malaria cases, and there's a clear similar pattern between the two series. So at the end of the day, two take-home messages. One is for every square kilometer of deforestation, we have about 27 new cases of malaria in the Amazon, and the areas with the small clear cut are the ones that matter the most. And that has to do with the whole dynamic of malaria transmission in the Amazon region, where the moment you cut the forest, you create this fringe between the forest and the cleared area, and mosquito density is extremely high in those areas. Now, sometimes what seems to be a terrific idea can backfire. And here, Acre decided to start an intervention to increase the livelihoods of the local population. And the idea here was to help those people to get out of this poverty cycle. And they promoted the opening of fish ponds in the Amazon, and it's mainly tilapia that is being produced. And the idea was terrific, and people were really making money selling fish, but they were also getting tons of malaria because those fish ponds are a phenomenal breeding habitat for the mosquito. So what we are doing now is we're doing a pilot intervention using biological larvicides because people are not going to close their fish ponds, and therefore you have to find a way to minimize the larval in the pond so people stop getting malaria. Now, with regards to dengue, and that's an interesting story. So that's a different mosquito. So Aedes aegypti, it really likes the city. It's an urban mosquito. It's mostly an urban disease. And because all those diseases have fever, if we look by 2000, it was more than 60% of the municipalities in the Amazon never had a single case of dengue. When you look at 2015, it's about 14 that never had a case of dengue. So it was pretty fast. And in fact, in 2010 and 2011, there was a major outbreak of dengue in Acre, which is where I work. And it was type 2 dengue, which it's quite serious, that was introduced in the area. And the attack rate was pretty high. So what happens here is that the way the Amazon is being urbanized is creating conditions for Aedes aegypti to really proliferate. So we can have a condition that both malaria is being transmitted, but also the arbovirus. And if it can transmit dengue, chikungunya and Zika are just two other arbovirus that can also circulate in those areas. Just to give you an idea of how fast urbanization, and again, whatever urban means in this context, and between the census of 2000 and 2010, there were 19 cities in Brazil that doubled in size. 10 of them are in the Amazon. So that gives you an idea of how fast this is. Now, when we think about future scenarios, so there are two options. Either I show you a black screen and start bragging here about everything that is going wrong, or I try to promote some discussion of things that could be done. And some of those may seem naive, but as naive as they are, they're not happening right now. So one is we do have a lot of terrific tools, and what you presented, Tasso, is one of them, right? So what I'm trying to do with the National Malaria Control Program in Brazil is to make sure that they get monthly reports of all areas that have new clear cut, so they can act before you have an outbreak of malaria. So the public health has this tendency of working as a fire brigade. You go there, you try to manage this fire, but we're never preventing a house to get on fire in the first place. And there are tools that could be used to make that happen. The second thing is we have to leverage the local knowledge and invite the local participation. You know, if you do field work in the Amazon, you discover things that people are doing to adapt to the challenges, to adapt to the realities. And this is not documented anywhere. And we can leverage this knowledge to make things better. And this applies to try to prevent themselves from being infected with the disease, but also agricultural practices as well. The other thing is we cannot think of policies just for the Brazilian Amazon. We need a regional perspective. And what's going on in the border of Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil is a clear example. So if we are to observe drug resistance to malaria in the Amazon, it's going to be in that triangle because of the crisis in Venezuela and the mining, completely illegal in the Guyana. And there's a huge population mobility in there, crossing the borders. Some fake drugs are circulated, so there is a high chance that we're going to have drug resistance in that area. And if it does happen, then it becomes a problem because we don't have another drug in the pipeline to be able to treat malaria. And the other thing is, some of us were mentioned this yesterday night, is the whole issue of public engagement. And here it goes from talking to the community to talking to public health officials. And it's not very comfortable. It's comfortable here because I think here pretty much everybody agrees with what we were saying, but it's really putting your face to crowds that don't agree with you. That's not always nice, but it's very needed. So I decided to end with a cartoon, and this is from 1910. And as I told you before, Osvaldo Cruz went on those expeditions to the Amazon. And here is Osvaldo Cruz on the horse, and he's the hero of sanitary reform in Brazil. And on the top, there are a bunch of microbes, and some are diseases, yellow fever, beriberi, but some are like corruption and you know, oligarchy, and they're also microbes. And then here is, and he has the flag of sanitary reform, and here's just a local resident that looks at him and say, oh, you're wise doctor, you're going across Brazil, and may God go with you in this journey. You put your life at risk. But besides malaria, can you get rid of the other microbes? And you know, he's referring to those. And Osvaldo Cruz says, oh, I'm sorry, it's impossible, because those microbes are political microbes. And there is no peaceful sanitation that can actually handle them. However, if you protest, maybe one day you could get rid of them. Wise man, Osvaldo Cruz. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to invite the panelists to come sit up at the front, and we are happy to take questions about their presentations from the audience. So.
Paulo, you addressed the enormity facing the scientific community over restoring 12.5 million hectares of land, forest. Might I suggest that it's not a thing facing the scientific community. We rely on the scientific community, and I speak as a non-scientist and a private sector man. We rely on the scientific community to produce the information. And the private sector, of course, many of you will say, no, government, to rectify the situation. I think we all know from now, since I've been going to COP15, I think it was, in 2010 or 9 or whenever it was, there's been very little progress in the private sector in working with science in rectifying a lot of these things. Paulo, I would suggest that you should have said the private sector, more than governments today, who have shown to be completely and totally, utterly useless at in any way addressing these problems other than talk. And many of you will know in this room that recently we've had a rebellion in the UK. The Brits aren't very good at rebellions. We always turn to the French and ask how to do it properly, because they do it better than we do. But we have had a rebellion, and it had a considerable impact. And whilst I won't read you the whole letter, it might, it might interest you to know that the private sector have been kicked pretty hard in the UK, to the extent that 22 chairmen, including Paul Polman, formerly of Unilever, wrote to say, and I quote, because this is relevant, I think, this is relevant to your thinking, wrote, contrary to belief, there is business support for the Extinction Rebellion. That was the rebellion name in the last, which took place a couple of weeks ago, stopped me going to my office. Hard pressures drive change, but even the most committed businesses will need time to respond. I will skip the rest and move to the end. Most businesses were not most businesses were not designed in the context of the developing climate emergency. Hence, we must urgently design entire industries and businesses using science-based targets. To kickstart the process, businesses should make a declaration that we face a climate emergency and organize a session at full board meetings to consider the case for urgent action. I happen to be a part of some of those boards. I will not read you the rest of the letter. Anybody who wants a full copy can get it. Paul Polman, who's known to many of you by name, was the signatory to it. as were 22 other pretty sensible people. I would like, therefore, to refer back to Edward's comments, who said, Harvard, and I hope not to misquote him, he said, Harvard should take leadership in this, and you didn't quite define how that should impact. I would suggest Harvard should take leadership, and it needs a platform from which to do it. And that is a subject perhaps we might be able to have a discussion later on about. But I agree, Harvard could, acting in a platform in the Amazon, do an enormous amount to encourage the private sector, who I know well, to participate, and the mood is right to get that participation today. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the essence of the question initially is the role that the private sector might play in achieving those targets, and it was addressed to you, Paulo, so maybe you can respond first.
Yeah, the issue, the absence, let's say, in this discussion of the private sector is really a kind of scandal, global scandal. What I mean by that, you know, of course, the oil industry, for instance, to get one single sector, you know, profited trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars over the last 100 years. Who will pay for the damage is actually the public and the governments. You know, so this discussion have to be completely open and now. You know, for instance, let's get a specific item: plastic pollution in the ocean. You know, so how much, for instance, was the profit from Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, and so on, the big companies responsible for the problem, and who will pay for the cleanup? We, not the companies. You know. And this discussion is not even over the table yet, because the companies, it's not true that they are not participating in the discussion. They are participating behind the governments. So they fund policies from the government that actually increase their profit, not on the public interest itself. You know? This happens in Brazil. This happens basically everywhere. And I think we really have to change that, because the cost of adaptation, is climate adaptation, especially for developing countries, will be huge. And it's not fair to expect they will pay themselves for a problem that actually companies profited trillions and trillions of dollars from the same issue.
Okay. Do any of the other panelists want to comment on that issue?
I just... small comment on the 12.5 million hectares of restoration that we have as a goal. Actually, there is today in Brazil, we're finalizing this analysis and using the maps. But at minimum, we have in Brazil today between 20 and 30 million hectares in regeneration. So it means, like, depending what you want to say, you can say that we have completed this. So, and obviously, whoever is the politician that will be there in 2025, they will say that yes, we got we completed the mission just by doing nothing, like just let it grow, right? The thing is, like, the reason why it's happening. So it's happening because you abandon the area, because it's not having, like, it's not gaining research on that. So I think that if we look at this 12.5 million as a different goal, which is like, we want to regenerate areas to be productive, like in terms of the environmental services, but also in terms of products and services, then we are talking about, like, the real goal. So it's not just like having forests come back. If it's just there, it's there happening.
I was struck by one of Ed Wilson's insights, and he said that protecting the Amazon rainforest and biodiversity requires not only the science, but also being in the mind and the spirit. And the limited time I've spent in the Amazon, and particularly down in the populated south of Rio and Sao Paulo and Brasilia, I've come back each time with a feeling that the perspective from there is very much like somebody from Atlanta or Boston or Miami thinking of the Yukon or Alaska. It's just way out there. It's a place we'll never see, and it's not part of our culture. And the populated South is where the power is, where the government and so forth, and people. And putting aside people like what's in this room, the limited number of the populace that I talked to and government people, I felt had that feeling, and I wondered, I mean, it's like America being colonized for the first 300 years, pushing back the wilderness, partly because it's wild and untamed and so forth, and partly for economic processes. I wonder if somebody would comment on that.
Well, there are 4 Brazilians here. I'm going to invite them to comment rather than me.
I don't know if I capture. No. I actually didn't capture the question.
Okay, Richard, I'll rephrase it, and you can see if you can agree. No. They don't quite understand asking what the key question is. So let me reiterate what I think the question is, and you can either nod your head or not. I think that the question is the sort of disconnect between the viewpoints in the major cities in Brazil about Amazon as a distant place, right, away from the major urban centers, and how that sort of feeds into the whole question about the future of the Amazon and how it's managed.
Oh, there are some interesting data on this. Every time you make, like, there is a, I think WWF and other organizations, they make, every few years, they make this kind of a poll in Brazil about, like, what are the main environmental problems and so on. So it strikes that every time they repeat this, the main environmental problem seen by people in the cities is deforestation in the Amazon. It's not linked to the river that is totally dead inside the city and things like that. It's basically like the deforestation in the Amazon. So I was thinking if it was from the perception of the people in the urban areas about what they think would be like the interesting to have in the Amazon, probably if we were mobilized by that, that would be like everything would be saved. I think that what we really have is that you think you understand that this is a problem, but you don't have an idea how you actually can interfere directly, right? That's I think that's the main point. I think in general for this, the problem is that if you have a property or if you have a land and you want to do something in this land, you were thinking just on your economy, like on your decision making for your, whatever you were doing in your property. And most of the impacts that we are talking here, they are beyond your property. It's the sum up of everything that's happening is creating a change on the whole region. So I think if you think about the interests of the country, the whole country, it's obviously we have to protect the forest. But if you think about the interests of every specific individual interest, then it will be different. That's the reason why you can't, for example, change the forest code, as we have now a lot of push to change the forest code and take out, for example, the limits of what you can clear cut in the forest. The reason why you can't do that, because if you have any individual just taking the decision of the best economic decision for him at that particular time, it will be different from what you need as a society in the whole region. So I think that's always this question about what you decide by yourself on your property and what you would decide if you have like as a whole society.
My question goes to Marcia. Thanks for your talk. Is this working? Okay. Over the years that you've been doing your research, how fast you see these outbreaks coming out after, such as an environmental disaster, for instance? My question is because in November 2015, we had one of the biggest environmental disasters in Brazil. We had the break of a dam in the Atlantic rainforest that polluted the whole river and devastated the biodiversity surrounded. And then in February and March, in January 2018, we saw an outbreak of yellow fever, killing many species of primates, for instance. So I know that's a bit speculating here, that the cause of this outbreak was actually the environmental disaster. But I wonder if you have seen that in other examples, in if we can try to predict how fast we'll see an outbreak after environmental disaster.
So on one hand, it depends what you're talking about. So connected to the dams that broke, there are some things that takes a long time for you to see. That's mental health, chronic diseases. They're happening, but they don't happen immediately. But the consequence is there, and nothing has been done yet. The infectious diseases are the ones that tend to happen more quickly. They respond very quickly. So they respond quickly to changes in climate, if you're talking about vector-borne diseases and so on and so forth. Now, the yellow fever, it was an interesting discussion, but what happens is that every year we have some species of monkey dying, and then what the Minister of Health has to do, not the Minister of Health, but the local health secretaries, they have to monitor the death of the monkeys, because that's an indication that it is circulating. So you have to make sure the population is vaccinated so you don't have infection. That happens all the time. What happened in the very first outbreak, which was in Minas, is that there were 2 municipalities there that completely, they just dropped the ball. The monkeys were dying. They laid off people. Nobody was monitoring that. By the time you realize there was a problem, it spread out. And the interesting thing about those monkeys is that when they see that others have died, they move to another forest. They're very smart. So by the time you want to respond, they are somewhere else, and they are infected. So we didn't have the urban transmission of yellow fever, which the last case was in 1942, and I hope it doesn't come back. What we had is the Sylvester that we can't eliminate at all, unless you kill all the monkeys, which is completely out of question. So, but there are consequences of those disasters. You take floods. I'm from Rio. It's quite common. You have several small outbreaks that happen after that. Leptospirosis and arbovirus is a big deal. Rio is full of chikungunya this year. It's a mess. And São Paulo has dengue in type 2, which is also complicated. So chronic diseases will take some time, and they tend to be neglected because they happen later. And then people are just going to say, it's not my fault. My disaster happened 3 years ago. The infectious diseases are more quickly to capture.
Question at the back there.
Hi, thank you all for your time. This question goes to whoever feels more comfortable answering. I think all of you have shown that this issue is very urgent, and I don't want to necessarily get political, but Bolsonaro has made it clear that this is not necessarily a priority for him. So I want to ask you what you think our role is as scientists, citizens of Brazil and of the world during the Bolsonaro presidency to sort of pressure for something to be done about the Amazon and preservation, and beyond whatever politicians get in power in the future. Thank you.
Yeah. Difficult question, but let's say, it's very clear that this policy does not have support from the general population in Brazil, first. Second point, the Brazilian Academy of Science, the Brazilian SBPC, and all scientific associations have made strong discussions against the policy to increase deforestation in Amazonia. So this is overall in the whole Brazilian society. Even in some sector of the agribusiness, they see that that's not very good business for them to see that soy production, for instance, is coming from deforestation. It's just a very minor but very influential sector of the Brazil agribusiness that's making pressure in the Bolsonaro government to do that. How will be the outcome of that is, of course, extremely hard to know. But for instance, we have some indications. Many of the IBAMA, Previfogo structure was completely destroyed by the new Minister of Environment. IBAMA itself, the decrease in the budget was not by the economic sector, but by the minister itself, have been reduced by 65% in total. So what they can do about that? You know, they don't have the personnel anymore. Several departments of the Minister of Environment were completely dismantled, you know. So even if this change of course, it will be very hard to set up again a new Previfogo that 4 or 5 years ago had about 800, 900 people working, fighting deforestation, you know. So it's, as I mentioned, it's a difficult question, but also difficult to answer, you know. We don't know what will happen, but what we know is that this does not have support either from the scientific community or even for the general Brazilian population.
Can I just say something quick? I just want to add one thing quickly. I think that as scientists, we have to produce the best science possible and be very mindful and careful on how we interpret our results and how we communicate our results, and get out of our very comfortable offices and publishing papers in journals that our peers who agree with us are going to read, and put our faces out there. And that's what I talk about, engaging and having discussion, translate our work in easier language, and use what they use as weapons, the social networks, and engage with people that are not listening to us, but are being very tempted by what they are saying. And we have a very short window to do this because everybody votes. So again, and that's maybe very naive and may not work out, but you know, we're all Brazilians here. The ones in Brazil may face a bigger challenge than we who are here because they're being, you know, persecuted. But we are here and we can create bridges and still make things happen. So I don't know any other way to fight except with what I believe I know how to do, which is good science.
Does he want to choose? I just want to add to what Marcia said, because I'm with her in this, especially because now we are trying to spread out the scientific work we are doing in the lab, you know, through videos and websites and Instagram. I had never had an Instagram before, so now I manage one. And to do that, because also to add to the statistics, 30% of the money which would go to the universities is cut off now, so 30%. And this, well, I received a message saying that this would go to researchers who want a nicer life, traveling around, you know. And some people think we just travel and do nothing. So even though they are, or the general population is against Bolsonaro, there are people who really believe he can solve our problems. Mm-hmm. So there's even, I'm not sure if it's the minority or not, you know, I'm not sure. I hope so.
He was elected.
Yeah, well, he was elected. So I think we should be resilient in this case and persist. You know, in this case, it's going to be for very hard years, but if we count on partners abroad, we can still do good science and prove that things can be done in a different way. But I agree with Marcia that we have to go out and open up what we are doing, because people to believe in us, especially in Brazil, my mom doesn't believe in what I do, you know. So it's like, because she only wants me to have a position. And I've been studying the Amazon for a while now. So it's about what Tasso said and all the others. So we have to go out there and search for opportunities, links abroad, and go through these 4 years and stand up for what we believe, I guess. Be resilient.
Maybe I can comment also on this, because I think there's fundamentally two things that has to be done now. One is to build alliances with civil society and the business, because that's how we kind of can start to make a movement that's from outside to inside the government. So one interesting example we have in Brazil that's running now for 3-4 years, I think, is something that we call the Coalition Climate, Forest, and Agriculture. I don't know if the sequence is this one. I don't remember. Although I'm part of that. So it's kind of, but I think it's forest, climate, or climate, forest, agriculture. But the thing is, like, you have in this group together NGOs, you have academia, people from universities and so on, and people from business, thinking together on what we agree. Actually, what are the things that we agree that we can move in terms of a long-term agenda for development, in those 3 areas. And so this is a kind of a vehicle that it's, depending on whatever is happening in the government, and you can have one of those 3 groups actually acting more. So now is the moment where the business people on this group is the one that has to be more, have more voice, because the government will hear more like them. But that's an alliance of those 3 groups. And then in a lot of science, for example, we are channeling through this group to actually capture that, transform in something that is a kind of a vision, and then you can have the talks with the different areas. So I think that's one way to work. The second thing that's important is that we have to make alliances or connections and create spaces with the other areas which is not the federal government. So it could be like, for example, the public prosecutors. You can work with the local governments, the state governments. There are different ones happening there. So I'll just give one example. One of the consequences of this work that we do at the mappings is that we create a second level of that, which is to produce what we call the MapBiomas alerts, which is we take every single alert that is created by Global Forest Watch and all those different organizations, which is something that all those systems are available there, and then if you are in IBAMA or any environmental agency, you have to capture those and try to figure out what to do with those alerts, like deforestation alerts. And so it takes more or less like 6 hours to produce one report that transforms one of those alerts in something actionable to go to the field. So what's the thing, like, how about if we eliminate it? So you don't have the excuse that you have to do all this work to actually take an action, right? So just to have an idea, for last year, we have 150,000 alerts in Brazil. Less than 1,000 were transformed into something actionable, like that you can go to the field and act. So what we're doing is basically taking all those alerts and then using high-resolution imagery to create something like the picture that you take on the car when they cross the red light, and have like the picture before and after the forest was clear-cut. Very simple. You can see up before and after. Make all the analysis that has to be done by this organization and create something that they can just click. And then in like 20 seconds, they have the report. Why are you doing that? Because we want to have an offer to the different agencies, including the federal agencies like IBAMA and the others. Like, here is an offer. It's for free. You can just simply go there and use it to take an action. So I think that we have to do this in many areas. Create offers to whatever is taking care of the policy for them to act no matter what. And there will be pressure, like by media and the others, to act because they have the tools to do it. So I think we have to do this as in science, kind of.
Ricardo Cortés, chemical engineer from Instituto Politécnico Nacional in Mexico City. I have attended multiple conferences like this on climate change. And invariable during the conferences, all these presenters use the term climate change, in this case, 15 so far here, rather than climate crisis, because people don't respond to climate change as climate crisis. So I request you, next time, change the subtitle, Conference on Climate Crisis. Thank you.
Okay. Done.
Noted.
Thank you very much for the panel for such an informative session. It represents so much work. To follow up a little on what has already been said about what might now be done, I wanted to ask, how deeply is the work that you represent informing the educational systems in Brazil? not just the universities, but with children starting as young as age 4 or 5 or 6, because that is where the future rests. This work is so important. How is it getting into the educational bloodstream? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I agree with you. And some of the work we are doing, not on this specifically, but on natural disasters and natural hazards, have been transformed into booklets for children and teenagers, but especially for children. So we have 2 volumes now. And yeah, we're trying to spread the information, but not on this, because we couldn't really find out a way of informing them about this yet, probably because of our ignorance in showing our results to child, right? But of course, we have to find people and find ways of doing that, because yeah, like hands-on stuff. I put some thought on that already, and I think it is very, very important. But I think we are trying to, at least in the South Brazil, yeah.
And just complementing the Amazon, you know, several NGOs are doing exactly what you mentioned in a limited time frame, you know, because it's this needs to be a long-term task. For instance, IPAM have done a beautiful booklet, you know, for kids 5 to 8 years old, you know, on how to avoid the deforestation, why deforestation is bad for your family, blah, 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 blah. So this has been distributed by thousands over the Amazon. It still is a very small contribution compared to the scale what we have to do. But there are isolated initiatives on that already, but this needs to be enhanced for sure.
Can I include something, Paulo? One thing we noted is that the reach we get from children depends on whether the community is involved or not. So I think independent on how we go and independent on the millions of copies we produce, it's important to put their families on the project. So it's important for them to see that the community is arranged in a way they are able to follow. Otherwise, it's useless because it's just words, you know. So I think it's important to involve the community.
See, my daughter is 9 years old. When she was 5, the teacher learned that I was a forest and said, "Oh, we were learning about trees, so why don't you come to talk with kids?" And have, so they form a panel. So I arrived there was like a panel like this, like it was like defending a thesis or something. It was the most frightening moment for me because the first question, easy, like I just showed some pictures, and the first question was, "Oh, you said that trees never stop to grow," which is true, right? And I said, "So how they die?" First question.
Love it. So good.
And if I try, I'll explain. And then I was making those connections with water and trees and the Amazon, etc. And then the one comes and says, "Oh, Dead of Clara," because they call me Dead of Clara, which my daughter. And they said, "Oh, Dead of Clara. So the desert don't have trees because they have no water, or there's no water because there's no trees?" So that's the level. So I think you're totally correct. Like children will be like, that's where we have to go. So we are doing one experiment that is not like, it's starting now in the state of Bahia. Google has a program. Google is a big partner. They have a program to form and educate the teachers. Mm-hmm. Teachers, we say? Yeah. In various fields for the kids. So we are doing one test, which is kind of using those tools of the mapping, this one, for the teachers to learn how to talk about the environment in which the children live in Bahia. So, and that's for kids from primary schools, and kind of 7 to 12, and we find that actually the teachers are very threatened by the same thing that I was describing before, because that it's how to talk about something without being superficial, but talking in the language that would work with the kids, etc. So, but yeah, I totally agree. We have to do much more than.
Thank you all to the panel. The tremendous amount of work that is behind these presentations is a gift, because we can't solve the problem unless we know what the problem is. And you've done just an amazing amount of work. So for somebody who's not a scientist, thank you for all the work that's behind what we heard today. I have a question for Professor Wilson regarding your 3 levels of extinctions that you referred to. And it has to do with how to confront those extinctions. I'm thinking of 2 ecosystems. One, the urban ecosystem. Half of the world, half of the population lives in urban areas. And how do you think we might get them involved? Not just Harvard as a center of biodiversity or as a bank or to protect what we already have, but to get people who live in urban areas to get engaged and involved in the problem. Brian Farrell pointed out to me yesterday that herring are coming back to the Charles River. I know that shad are coming back to the Hudson River. There are improvements, at least in the developed world, of the ecosystems within urban areas, but how do we get the residents of those urban areas involved in the rainforests that are away from where they live? How can that possibly be one vector, one venue for getting the vast amount of the population that is actually consuming the products that are the result of the deforestation? How to get them involved in stopping the damage? That's one ecosystem. The other one is a business ecosystem. If the profits of Coca-Cola are now in plastic islands in the Pacific, how can we get the shareholders, the current shareholders of Coca-Cola, which is really who Coca-Cola is, engaged with the notion that not only their current but their future profits are involved, not only with how sustainable their current practices are, but how responsible they are about their externalities of their past. I'm looking to find ways of getting people involved who are not involved now, who are not scientists looking at the problem, but who are consumers, both on the financial side and in urban areas and the living side. Do you think that is a possibility?
May I have the afternoon to answer that question? Well, I'll answer it. I want to be as brief as I possibly can because I've just been extraordinarily impressed, as I'm sure you who came to hear what was forthcoming from a group like this was the outstanding good science that's going on, the amount of material that's been put together and the ideas that are now emerging. I also wanted to come here and listen to what is being added to what we desperately need, which is a much more fully developed ecosystem science. We lack it now primarily. I believe, just coming at this obliquely now, that one of the most interesting things that could be happening in pure science is to take the mass of data of the kind that we're hearing and the concepts that are emerging from them to help develop, for the first time, a really rigorous and complete ecosystem science. In a way, it's been mentioned by at least one of the speakers that what's of interest is the entirety of the Amazon basin and not just slivers of problems that are emerged that become more or less severe. The Amazon could be the ideal laboratory for the development of ecosystem science, is what I'm trying to approach to say. I think that ecosystem studies and the understanding of ecosystems with an immense number of interactions between natural and human caused phenomena is going to be the next big thing, if I might use that word that people use for development of new art fashions in Long Island, art economies. The next big thing is to produce a complete and predictive ecosystem science, and that's what I wanted to learn. And you've been talking about it along margins and then going into it so very well. Let me tell you one reason why I'm particularly interested in that, because it's relevant to some of the questions that have already been asked, namely particularly with the role of business leaders and also of its impact on education. So I'm going to try to be as brief as I possibly can. In the last several months, I've been approached by 2 separate organizations of business leaders, CEOs, one at a conference organized and run by MIT, and the other by the country's CEOs in San Francisco independently. And then by a third group, this time entailing plans to send Americans to Mars on a more than 1,000-day trip. And they all asked the same question, or at the request of me. Would you please explain ecosystems to us? The executives, the business executives, feel that if they could understand how ecosystems work, they could use some of these principles in building and reaching equilibration that ecosystems are supposed to have in their particular enterprises, from startups all the way to mature business. They believe that something big is about to happen in the business world. The group in San Francisco even have a name for it. They call it the New Paradigm. The evidence is coming in data from many of the businesses in this country, mainly independent operations and different utilization of resources. It's coming in, and this is what they call the new paradigm, that whenever a business begins to make a shift from emphasis on pleasing its shareholders to taking care of its stakeholders, including not just the people who run the business and make the products and do the work, but also its relation to the community around it, and now increasingly the environment. So there is an eagerness to, and through a wide range, I know, of the business community now, to learn from the lessons of the environment now that we're being put to the test. And so I would say the next big thing, again, I'll say it, in biology and the biological sciences is going to be the development of an ecosystem science. It's very exciting. I've been hearing phenomenon after phenomenon described, relationship after relationship described brilliantly. And I was saying, this is the beginning of what we need. Now we come to education, and that is, the gentleman back here asked, how can we improve education with the experiences and the science that goes into solving these extremely complex problems as they emerge. And I've seen, I think, the best way to do this, particularly with the youngest people, is get them out on bio-blisses. That is to get them out helping with the cataloging of the species of plants and animals. BioBlitzes began in New England about 20 or 30 years ago, and it involved the entire community bringing together experts on different groups of organisms and asking and getting people to, with the help of the experts, to go out. In this case, it was away all around Malden Pond, where Thoreau had done his work, and help the experts find every kind of ant and bird and flower and so on that they possibly couldn't get it identified. And I think something like 1,200 species were found in one day at that particular BioBlitz. The idea spread. It became a vital force in the full accounting of biodiversity in the Great Smokies National Park, where 19,000 species have now been identified. It spread widely and was, in the first couple of years, practiced in 33 countries, and it's remained very popular. And the reason why it has considerable power with reference to education is that it's a route around the steep staircase set up by STEM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, which has become almost a religion in the United States as the way for young people who want to go on to lives and careers in science and technology must climb in order to be ready for the making, going into advanced studies and then into these careers, and that is a completely wrong approach. The right approach, I think, has been my experience as an observer, is that the young people become scientists themselves. That is to say, they pick up on things they can do. You empower them by starting them as doing the things the actual scientists do, which is to collect, observe, and participate in finding out what plants and animals exist. And when that happens, then the students are eager to learn STEM, or at least in the right sequence, in order to enable them to do this kind of work that they find so exciting. That's just, I don't know if anything like this has been done or thought about in Brazil, but this is what's emerging here. So the two things that I would add to that, and probably not with much enlightenment, but in addition to just saying what my admiration is for the terrific good work being done on the Amazon and its problems in Brazil, is to recognize that one of the difficulties we have in pushing forward this kind of good work in countries all around the world. I've had my most experience in Mozambique, in the national park there. And I've seen it very similar to what's being described here, as to now encourage the work needed to develop ecosystems science. And I am going to do what I can here at Harvard, since Harvard has been made relevant to all of this, to help promote through the multiple channels of creativity that we have here at Harvard, a new science. Well, it'll be the first real science of ecosystems studies. If you have a better name for that, incidentally, give it to me, will you? And we can start using it. This would be the better part of what a brilliant university, and you have them in Brazil as well, can contribute. It'll be also a way of utilizing the kind of data and the on-site observations being made by the best scientists in countries like Brazil to mold ecosystems studies. And when that is achieved, then I'm going to have something to bring to the business executives.
All right, so we're out of time, so we're going to end with those reflecting words from Ed. And I just want to thank you all for coming, and we'll just end by thanking our panel for contributing their knowledge.